Hello and welcome. I'm glad you're here. Before we begin tonight's journey through the quieter corners of Victorian London, I would love to hear from you in the comments. What would you like your dreams to be about each night? And what time do you think your dreams usually begin? I hope you're already subscribed to the channel, because tonight's story, if it doesn't lull you to sleep right away, will ease your night into a whole new level of comfort. Let us begin by letting the day go. Let your limbs grow heavier, your breath slower. Allow the light around you to dim, or at least feel dimmer, as we gently shift from present time into something older. London. Not the one you may know with buses and neon and glass-fronted buildings, but an earlier London, a quieter, sootier city, the kind that creaks when it breathes. It is the year 1875. The streets are cobbled and wet. The air hangs heavy with the mingled scents of coal smoke, horse dung, and yesterday's ale. Iron railings line the streets like crooked teeth, and the windows of tenements are small and dark, smudged with the fingerprints of countless children who peer out, even when there's nothing much to see. You live in a brothel, though it's rarely called that out loud. Perhaps it's a boarding house, or a lady's residence, or simply the house on Maltby Street. It doesn't matter. Everyone who walks past knows what it is. They can tell by the door, painted a little too red or a little too clean, depending on the neighborhood. They can tell by the women who sometimes lean in the windows in the early evening, watching the street with an expression that is neither welcoming nor cold, just waiting. The room you sleep in is narrow and worn. There's a small bed, the mattress thin and flattened by years of use. The blanket is scratchy and holds the faint smell of coal ash, damp wool, and the body of whoever used it before you. There's a single chair beside the bed, and a small table with a ceramic basin on top. Sometimes the water in it is fresh. Sometimes it isn't. The ceiling is low. You can reach up and touch it if you stretch. The wallpaper, faded floral, is peeling in one corner. You've stopped trying to press it back into place. Mice live in the wall behind your head. You hear them sometimes at night, scratching gently like distant fingernails. You don't mind them. They never ask for anything. You wake not to the sun, but to the sound of boots on floorboards. Somewhere downstairs, the madam is moving through the parlor. Her steps are clipped, sharp. She opens shutters, unlocks the front door, pours tea into chipped mugs. She doesn't knock on your door. She doesn't need to. You know the rhythm. You sit up slowly. The cold of the room hits you first, not sharp, just present, everywhere. In your toes, your fingertips, the skin behind your ears. You wrap the blanket tighter for a moment. Close your eyes again. Try to remember your dreams, not because they were pleasant, but because they were yours. Eventually, you stand. You wash your face with cold water from the basin. There's no towel, so you use the edge of your shift. You dress in the same wool gown as yesterday. It's gray or brown, hard to tell anymore. You wear it because it's the one that still fits. You smooth your hair back, twist it into a knot, and fasten it with a pin borrowed from another girl. There's no mirror in your room, only a small square of polished tin nailed to the wall. You glance into it anyway. What you see is not shocking. It's just a face, pale, tired, clean enough. You blink, and the image blurs. Downstairs, the house smells of tea and last night's candle wax. The other girls sit in silence. One smokes a pipe. Another reads an old novel with a torn cover. The third is sewing a button back onto her bodice. No one speaks unless spoken to. A morning is a quiet thing here. The madam, Miss Lydia, though that's not her real name, pours tea without looking up. The pot is stained brown, and the tea itself is weak, but it's warm, and that's something. You take the mug, nod your thanks. She nods back. That's all. You sip slowly, letting the heat seep into your fingers. You eat a crust of bread left from yesterday. You chew it thoughtfully, as if it were something more. In this house, food is always eaten slowly. Not for manners, but because no one knows when the next meal will come. Eventually, the men begin to arrive. They do not knock hard, just a soft rap, as if they're asking a favor. Miss Lydia answers. She always does. She smiles. But her smile is not warm. It's precise, measured. She speaks in a voice that's one octave higher than her natural tone. It makes her seem cheerful, though no one in the house has seen her truly smile in years. The first man of the day is young, a bank clerk maybe. His hands are ink-stained. He glances around the parlor and gestures toward one of the newer girls. Miss Lydia nods. The girl stands. She doesn't speak. She leads him upstairs. The floorboards creak. The door clicks shut. You stay seated. You haven't had a visitor yet today. That's not unusual. Sometimes it's quiet. Other times you see 6 or 7 men before dinner. There is no pattern, no logic, just the ebb and flow of desire and coin. The house is warmer now, thanks to the small fire in the house. The flames crackle softly. You watch them for a long time. Not because they're interesting, but because they move. And movement is rare here. Eventually, your name is called, not your real name. A name Miss Lydia gave you. Something soft, forgettable, feminine. You rise, smooth your dress, wipe your hands on your shawl. You climb the stairs slowly, knowing each step by feel. The man waiting in the room is older, well-dressed. His coat is fine wool, and his boots are polished. He does not look at you when you enter. He removes his gloves, places them on the knitstand. He speaks in a low voice. You nod, say nothing. You've learned that quiet is safest. The room is small but clean. The linens are changed every few days. There's a candle burning on the mantel. It smells faintly of beeswax and citrus. The man unbuttons his coat. You close the door. When it is over, he dresses quickly, leaves coins on the table. You wait until he's gone to pick them up. You count them once, twice, then carry them downstairs and hand them to Miss Lydia. She takes half, for the room, for the food, for the house. She gives you your share in a handkerchief. You tuck it into your bodice. Say nothing. The stairs creak beneath your steps as you descend again. The house feels a little warmer now, but only in patches. Cold still clings to the baseboards and leaks through the gaps in the window panes. A candle flickers at the end of the hall, struggling against a faint draft. You pass by the girls seated in the parlor again. One is threading a needle under the lamplight. Another peels an apple, slowly with a paring knife. It's quiet work, almost meditative. The sound of peeling is soft, rhythmic, a calm counterpoint to the muffled street noise outside. You return to your chair and sit down slowly. Your body aches in familiar ways. Not sharp pain, just the dull kind that comes from repetition, from tensing muscles, from holding your breath when you shouldn't need to. Miss Lydia says nothing. She rarely does after a call. She records the transaction with a stub of graphite in her ledger book. You glance toward it as she turns the pages, neat columns of names, times, and amounts. There are no real names written there, just initials, symbols. It's all coded, but she knows what each line means. Each mark is a woman's hour, a part of her that won't return. The day continues in this fashion. Sometimes the house is silent for long stretches. Sometimes a knock comes just as another finishes. You never know what kind of day it will be until it's over. The girls have stopped trying to guess. Later, just after the lamps are lit and the parlor glows with amber gaslight, a group of men arrives together. 3 of them, loud, flushed with drink, laughing at a joke that none of the women heard. They smell of gin and roasted chestnuts and damp wool. One carries a parcel wrapped in newspaper. Another drops his cane near the door and doesn't bother picking it up. Miss Lydia greets them with her practiced tone, welcoming, deferential. She offers tea or brandy. The men choose brandy. The house only has a little hidden behind the tea tins. She pours with a steady hand. Her smile doesn't waver. They select girls as if browsing wares. One gestures vaguely in your direction. You rise when prompted. You no longer flinch when they point. You no longer blush. You just move. Upstairs again. The candle from earlier is now half its height. It burns unevenly, dripping wax in lazy curves down the brass holder. You light another from the flame and set it near the window. The flickering light throws long, soft shadows against the wall. The man behind you clears his throat. He removes his jacket. You prepare yourself. The hour passes slowly. The man is boisterous, but not cruel. He laughs at his own stories. You nod when appropriate. You don't offer more than needed. He is drunk enough not to notice the silence. When he leaves, he drops a silver coin on the table and forgets his hat. You return it to him at the stair. He grins. You do not. Later that evening, the air in the parlor thickens. Not with smoke or perfume, but with weariness. The kind that wraps itself around the shoulders and settles into joints. One of the girls leans against the windowsill, staring through the thin curtain at the street beyond. Her posture is relaxed, but her expression is far away, as though she's looking at something that I send to there. You join her. From this angle, the street below is little more than shadow and motion. The gaslight halo glows in a puddle on the cobblestones. A man in a top hat passes by without glancing up. A cart rattles in the distance. Somewhere, a baby cries. Somewhere else, someone sings. Just a few drifting notes from a pub too far to name. The girl beside you speaks. Her voice is soft, almost a whisper. They say it's going to rain tonight. You nod. You can feel it too. The air is dense. Close. The kind of air that holds rain in its breath, waiting to release it. She continues. Rain makes him slower. More polite sometimes. You've heard that before. No one knows why. But there is something about wet boots and dripping hats that makes even the worst of them pause. Later still, after another knock and another client, you find a moment alone in the kitchen. The fire is low now. Only red embers remain, pulsing gently like a heartbeat. You pour yourself the last of the tea. Lukewarm, but still comforting. You sit at the worn wooden table and wrap your shawl tighter around your shoulders. The kitchen smells faintly of onions and soap. There's a pan drying on the rack, its edge dented. A jar of pickled eggs stands on the counter, untouched. Someone once brought them as a gift. No one had the stomach to eat them. You look at your hands. The knuckles are rough. The skin along your palms is dry, and peeling from the lye used to clean linens. You stretch your fingers slowly. One nail is cracked. You make a mental note to trim it before it catches on anything. A floorboard creaks behind you. You don't turn. It's just one of the others, returning from upstairs. She doesn't speak. She moves to the cupboard, pours herself a cup of water, and leans against the sink. Her eyes are blank, not tired. Just blank. The two of you sit in silence. Eventually, she murmurs something about sore knees. You nod, offer her the seat beside you. She takes it. You sit together, staring at the cooling embers. The silence isn't awkward. It's familiar, like a blanket you've shared a dozen times before. Night in the house is like this. Flickering lights, slow breathing, a distant sound of wheels turning in the street, footsteps, doors closing, and underneath it all, a kind of quiet understanding. You are not friends, not exactly, but you know each other in a way no one else does. You have seen each other's faces in the worst light. You have shared soup when there wasn't enough. You have helped each other stand when one couldn't. There is a dignity in this, a quiet, unspoken dignity. It lives in the way you hold your shoulders, in the way you pass the bread without being asked, in the way you listen when someone says nothing at all. By the time the gas lights outside glow their brightest, the house takes on a different mood. Not louder, not exactly, but more deliberate, more certain. The footsteps are steadier now. Clients arrive with intention rather than curiosity. These are not hurried visits before tea or quick glances stolen on a midday walk. These are men who plan, who return, who expect. You have learned to recognize them by their knock. It's always soft, surprisingly so, but confident. 3 taps, a pause, then 2 more. A code, not universal, but familiar. A rhythm that says, I've been here before. I know what I want. Miss Lydia answers each time. Her greeting changes slightly with each visitor. A tone, a tilt of the head, a choice of words. She adjusts to each man like a well-worn glove, making sure it fits without ever appearing stretched. You are summoned again. Not with a gesture, but a glance. You rise, smoothing your dress by habit. You light another candle before ascending. Not for romance, simply because the last one burned out. The light is important. It softens the edges. It makes things just bearable. The man who waits in the room tonight is older than most. Broad-shouldered, gray at the temples. His eyes are bloodshot, though he does not appear drunk. He removes his gloves slowly, places them in his hat, and sets them on the chair by the wall. You nod. He does not speak. You move closer. The work is the same. It changes, of course, from man to man, but only in minor details. A preference, a silence, a word. But the rhythm remains. You are practiced now. Not hardened, not completely, but efficient. Detached in a way that feels like floating above your own body. When it ends, he lingers a moment longer than most. He speaks at last, something vague. A compliment, perhaps, or a memory. You smile gently, nod again. He leaves. You do not watch him go. You wait a full minute before rising. You straighten the linens, relight the candle. You sit for a moment in the wooden chair beside the bed and exhale through your nose. Not a sigh. just a slow release, as though reminding your body it can breathe again. You collect the coins he left behind, enough for your share and a little extra, enough to consider buying a new comb from the street vendor near Borough Market, or a bit of ribbon, or a meat pie that hasn't been reheated 5 times. You return to the parlor, handing the coins to Miss Lydia. She nods, writes in the ledger. The routine is simple now. Clean, efficient, transactional. You appreciate that. It leaves little room for confusion. Another hour passes. You sit near the fire with one of the other girls. She's younger, maybe 17, or younger still. It's hard to say. She never says much, but tonight she leans toward you, speaks without looking up. Do you remember your first? You pause, not because the answer is unclear, but because you wonder what she's really asking. Do you remember the man? The room? The feeling? Or do you remember who you were before it? You don't answer right away. She doesn't seem to mind. She's not looking for details, just acknowledgement, connection. You nod slowly. She nods back. That's enough. Later still, as the house begins to quiet, you return to your room. You light the stub of candle left from earlier. You undress by its flickering glow, folding your dress carefully, placing it on the chair. You wash again in the basin, the water now colder than before. You dry your skin with a square of cloth. You sit on the edge of the bed, comb your hair with your fingers, and listen. There's a hush now, a kind of stillness that only comes late, when even the most persistent clients have gone home. You hear distant carriage wheels, a dog barking 2 streets away, and the occasional creak from above, perhaps Miss Lydia moving about, or a loose shutter tapping in the wind. You blow out the candle. The room darkens instantly. The smell of melted wax drifts upward. You lie back, pulling the blanket up to your chin. The mattress sags slightly in the middle. You shift to one side, tucking your knees up beneath you. Sleep does not come quickly. It never does. But your eyes grow heavy, and your body grows still. Your mind drifts. Not to dreams, not yet, but to memories. Not sharp ones, just sensations. The feel of the coal stove in your mother's kitchen. The weight of a summer sky when you were small. The sound of someone humming 2 floors below. And slowly, gently, the city softens. The night deepens. The rhythm of the house fades to a whisper. And for a few hours you rest, not deeply, not without interruption, but enough. Enough to rise again tomorrow and do it all once more. The room is quiet again. You sit in the far corner, near the one window that opens barely. It sticks most days, the frame swollen with damp. But today, it opens just enough to let in a thin ribbon of cold air. You rest your elbows on the sill and lean forward slightly, eyes scanning the street below. The world outside moves with a strange kind of urgency. Carriages pass quickly, the horses tossing their heads as if annoyed by their own pace. A paper boy rushes by, calling headlines that none of the girls will read. A woman in a hat trimmed with violet feathers pauses at the corner, searching for something in her purse, before disappearing into the grayness again. Inside the house, everything is slower. Time folds in on itself here. You look at the clock, then look again an hour later, only to find that only a few minutes have passed. There are few landmarks to mark the passing hours. No meetings, no appointments, no shift changes or bells. Only the knocks at the door, the creaking stairs, and the muffled voices behind closed doors. You move from the window and gather the day's linens. The house employs no maid, no servant. The girls take turns changing sheets, airing out the rooms, scrubbing basins with vinegar and lye. You work quietly, folding pillowcases, checking for tears in the seams. Everything smells faintly of iron and lavender water, the scents mingling with the ever-present coal dust that clings to every surface in the city. Downstairs, one of the girls is trimming a candle wick with the edge of a broken scissor blade. Another peels a carrot over the sink. Miss Lydia sits at her desk, ledger open, Neeb pen scratching as she tallies the week's totals. She does not speak unless spoken to. Her presence is constant, but not invasive, like a portrait that watches you from a hallway wall. There is no conversation here, not in the way people think of it. Words are traded like currency carefully, and only when needed. A nod replaces a thank you. A glance replaces a question. It is easier this way. Talking takes energy, and energy is not something wasted in this house. You hear the knock before anyone else moves. It's late afternoon, and most visitors come later. But the rhythm of the city is unpredictable. Miss Lydia rises, walks to the door, and opens it just wide enough to reveal the man on the other side. He is tall, thin, with a hat pulled low over his eyes. He speaks softly, and Miss Lydia gestures toward you. You do not rise immediately. Not out of defiance, never that, but because you have learned to take your time, to move without rush. You fold the final pillowcase, place it on the chair, and smooth your skirt with both hands. Only then do you walk to the stairs, climbing slowly, evenly, the creak of the third step marking your passage like a chime. The man waits near the bed, his coat still buttoned. You nod to him and step inside, closing the door behind you. The room is warmer now, the last light of the afternoon spilling golden across the quilt. You light a single candle from the mantel, its flickering glow softening the shadows. The man removes his coat, draping it over the chair. He does not speak, and you do not ask. The work is routine. It does not shock you. It does not move you. It simply is a motion, a posture, a series of learned responses. You do not dissociate, not fully, but you allow your thoughts to wander, to drift to another room, another street, a memory not tethered to this moment. When it ends, the man rises, dresses, leaves a coin on the mantel, and departs without a word. The latch clicks softly. You exhale, not deeply, not loudly, just enough. Enough to mark the end of this encounter. Enough to begin the next part of your day. You do not pocket the coin immediately. Instead, you sit on the edge of the bed, candle flickering beside you, and look down at your hands. They are dry, cracked near the knuckles. You rub them together slowly, feeling the grain of your skin. You stretch your fingers, rotate your wrists. Small motions, quiet rituals. Eventually, you rise. You straighten the bed, empty the basin, fold the towel. You relight the candle in the hallway and make your way back downstairs. Miss Lydia takes the coin with a nod, scratches another line in her ledger. You return to the parlor and pour yourself a cup of tea. It is still warm, barely. Another girl joins you, seating herself with a sigh. She has a bruise near her collarbone, fading now, but still visible in the low light. She doesn't mention it. Neither do you. Instead, she talks about a book she found in the street, a discarded copy of Oliver Twist. She's never read it, but she's heard of it. You nod, say that you've heard of it too. You share a smile. thin but genuine. Evening falls again. The house glows from within. Each window a small square of amber light. The streets outside grow darker, colder. You hear the muffled sound of rain beginning soft at first, then steadier. The drops strike the sill outside your window in irregular rhythm, tapping like a gentle reminder that the world is still moving beyond these walls. You climb the stairs once more, this time not for a client, but for rest. Your room is still, the air inside cool, and still scented faintly with coal and wax. You undress slowly, folding your clothes carefully, laying them on the chair. You wash again with fresh water, pat your face dry with a piece of linen. You light your final candle for the night and sit in its glow. You reach beneath the bed and retrieve a small tin box. Inside it, a comb, a stub of pencil, a handkerchief with faded embroidery, a tiny mirror no larger than your palm. You hold it up, study your reflection in the flickering light. You are tired. Your eyes are rimmed with red. But you are still here. You are still yourself. You replace the items, blow out the candle, and lie down. The mattress shifts beneath your weight. The blanket is thin but familiar. You pull it to your chin, turn to one side, and close your eyes. The rain continues outside, steady now, soothing in its rhythm. The house settles around you, wood creaking, water dripping, distant voices muffled by walls. You sleep, lightly, unevenly, but you sleep. The candle is out, but its scent still lingers faintly in the air. Warm wax, slightly sweet. Your room is quiet, wrapped in the hush that only deep night brings. The kind of quiet that isn't silent, but instead filled with small, slow sounds. The creak of the building settling into itself, the tap of rain dripping from a windowsill above, the occasional distant shuffle of footsteps in the hallway as someone moves from room to room. Your body feels heavy against the mattress, not in pain, just tired. The kind of tired that lives in your bones. The kind of tired you carry with you like a second skin. You shift beneath the blanket, drawing your knees toward your chest, your arms folded close, a position of habit, of safety. You try to sleep, but sleep is never immediate. Your mind drifts first, through the fog of the day just ended. Faces pass through your memory like shadows on a curtain, some familiar, some not. Hands, voices, scents, none of them linger. They pass, fade, dissolve. You let them go. The house has returned to its nighttime rhythm. The last clients have left. The lamps downstairs are extinguished. The girls who shared the space around you are also resting, or trying to. Some whisper to one another. A soft laugh carries through the floorboards. Someone coughs. Someone else turns over, the bed springs groaning under their weight. Eventually, your thoughts turn not to the day behind you, but to the one ahead. You wonder, in a distant way, how many more days like this there will be. Not because you dread them, but because you don't imagine anything else anymore. This has become the shape of your life, waking, working, waiting. The rhythm never breaks. It slows, sometimes, but it never stops. You think, briefly, of leaving. Not because you believe you can, but because the thought itself is comforting. You imagine walking away from the house, turning a corner, vanishing into a part of London where no one knows your name, neither your real one nor the one the clients use. But even in imagination, it feels impossible. Not because you lack courage, but because you lack resources, money, protection, a place to go. These are not romantic dreams. They are quiet thoughts, simple ones. You let them drift away again. Eventually, sleep comes not deeply, not soundly, but enough. You drift in and out, dreams brushing against your consciousness like moths at the edge of lamplight. You do not remember them when you wake. You rarely do. Dawn returns not with sunlight, but with lightness. A softening of the dark. A change in the color of the room. You open your eyes and wait a moment before sitting up. Your neck aches slightly. Your hip is numb from lying in the same position too long. You stretch carefully, yawn without sound. The house has not yet stirred. That is unusual. Most mornings, someone is already up boiling water, opening windows, preparing tea. But today, it's still. You rise slowly, wrap your shawl over your shoulders, and move toward the basin. The water has gone tepid. You splash your face anyway. You dress quickly. The same dress as before. You fasten the buttons without looking. Your fingers move on their own. You check the pin in your hair. Twist it slightly tighter. Fold the extra linen back into the corner. All the motions of morning, done without thought. Downstairs, the air is cooler than usual. One of the windows is cracked open, letting in the smell of wet stone and soot. A girl stands in the corner, brushing her dress with a stiff bristled brush. Another leans over the hearth, coaxing the embers back to life. Miss Lydia is absent. That, too, is rare. You sip your tea quietly, sitting in your usual place. The bread today is a bit fresher than expected. Someone must have gone out early. You chew slowly, letting the texture fill your mouth, soft against your tongue. You don't speak. No one does. Eventually, the knock returns. Not harsh, not hurried, just a knock. And the rhythm of the house resumes. A client enters, older, familiar. He carries a book this time. You've seen him with it before. He never speaks of it. Just sets it on the table beside the bed while he undresses. You wonder if he reads it between visits, or if he carries it only for the illusion of purpose. Upstairs, the room is warm. The candle burns low. The curtains hang still. The bed is made, the sheets straight. Everything is in place. The man sits, removes his shoes, looks out the window. You wait. You've learned that waiting is part of the work. It is not wasted time. It is what prepares you for what follows. When the act ends, he lingers, as usual, picks up the book, turns it in his hands, says nothing. He places the coins on the dresser and leaves. You remain seated, brushing your skirt flat with your palms. You count the coins. Enough for today. Perhaps enough for the rest of the week if it's slow. You rise, straighten the bed, wash your hands, relight the candle in the hallway. You move without noise, your footsteps light against the wood. You pass another girl on the stairs. She nods. You nod. The quiet continues. In the kitchen, the stew simmers on the hob. Someone has added onions today. A luxury. The scent fills the house with something that feels almost like comfort. You sit at the table with a shallow bowl, the heat rising gently into your face. The warmth reaches your cheeks, your fingers. You cradle the bowl between your hands. Close your eyes. The meal is plain, but it is hot. And that, for now, is enough. Afternoon settles over the city like a shawl, gray, frayed, and heavy. The sky beyond the window is dull, neither bright nor dark, simply colorless. The kind of sky that gives no clues. No threat of rain. No promise of sun. Just the long, uneventful light of midday London. You are back in your room again, seated near the window. You've pulled the chair slightly to the left to avoid the draft that seeps in between the warped boards. Your hands rest in your lap, one folded loosely into the other. You aren't thinking about much. You've learned not to. There's a discipline in emptiness, a kind of peace in not reaching for anything. The brothel is quiet in the middle hours. This lull between lunch and dusk is often still. The morning clients have gone. The evening ones haven't yet arrived. For a little while, the house belongs to you and the others. You don't speak of this as ownership, but you feel it in the silence, a kind of shared pause. Downstairs, someone is washing linens in the large wooden basin near the stove. You can hear the water slosh, the cloth slapped gently against the rim. Another girl is slicing carrots into coins, preparing the stew for later. The knife clicks rhythmically against the cutting board. The scent of thyme has started to bloom in the kitchen, a rare addition, gifted by a client who fancied himself a gentleman. You stretch your legs slowly, point your toes, then relax. Your feet ache less today. Your ankle has stopped swelling. The bruise on your thigh from the week before is fading into the color of old paper. You don't touch it. You simply note its progress. There's comfort in these small rituals, the quiet ones, the ones that belong only to you. The pacing of your breath, the way you fold your stockings, the feel of warm cloth laid out on your lap. These are your measures of time, your means of marking life in a world that rarely gives anything freely. Someone knocks, gently this time, and pushes the door open before you can answer. It's not a client, but one of the girls. Mary. She's barely 17, with a gap in her front teeth and a voice so soft it is often mistaken for shyness. She enters holding a folded paper. "Someone left this for you," she says, and sets it on your table. You nod. She doesn't wait for thanks. Just closes the door with care as she leaves. You unfold the paper slowly. The note is brief, 5 lines, written in a quick, practiced hand. A client from 2 nights ago. He thanks you, says he found the conversation calming, that he'd like to return, that he'll bring something small, if allowed. The note isn't affectionate, but it's kind. You fold it again, place it beneath your book, and sit quietly. A long breath escapes from between your lips. Not a sigh, just a release. Later, you walk to the market with another girl. Miss Lydia gives permission for the outing. Short, just a few streets. You wear your second-best dress and a shawl pinned tight across your chest. Outside, the air bites a little. Not cold enough to sting, just sharp enough to remind you of the season. The market is busy. Baskets of apples, some bruised. Piles of potatoes flecked with dirt. A cart selling ribbons, all of them dulled from the sun. You buy 2 carrots, a small turnip, and a half loaf of bread. The grocer says little, just hands you your change without meeting your eyes. You walk back in silence, the bag worn from your hand. Beside you, the other girl hums a melody you don't recognize. A tune from elsewhere. The street is lined with boots and puddles. Horses breathe steam as they pass. You return before dusk, the house looming like a memory made of brick and smoke. Inside, Miss Lydia counts the coins with a glance, nods, says nothing. You take the vegetables to the kitchen, add them to the pot. The scent changes, grows deeper. You climb the stairs again, slowly, the weight of your day held loosely in your shoulders. In your room, you light the candle, warm the water, soak your feet in the basin. It's a rare pleasure, one you grant yourself on quiet afternoons. The ache begins to fade. You lean back, resting your head against the wall. You drift, not asleep, but somewhere nearby. In your mind, you walk streets that don't exist. Streets with clean cobbles and quiet parks. Shops that sell sweets wrapped in white paper. Windows with lace curtains that flutter in real wind. You aren't searching for anything in these dreams. You just walk, slowly, softly, the way you've always wished to. Time passes without asking. You're called again. Another client. You rise, dry your feet, dress carefully. The mirror shows your face, framed by hair that's beginning to come loose. You pin it up again. Straighten your bodice. Take one last breath before you leave the room. He is waiting in the parlor. Young, this one. Barely 20. Nervous. You can see it in the way he adjusts his collar. The way he holds his hat in both hands. He chooses his words slowly. You listen. Smile just enough. Lead him upstairs. He talks a lot. About books, mostly. About his job, his cousin, the weather. You nod, ask questions. Not because you care, necessarily, but because kindness is easier than silence. He thanks you when he leaves. Leaves 2 coins. One more than expected. You take them down. Miss Lydia notices. Her eyes flick briefly toward you. Approval, perhaps, or just curiosity. You set the coins on the tray and return to your seat. The evening has arrived. Outside, the gaslights flicker. Rain returns, soft and cold. The sound against the glass is soothing. The house feels smaller, wrapped tight in steam and shadow. You sip another cup of tea. Close your eyes for a moment. The warmth seeps into your fingers, your chest, the hollow behind your eyes. You are tired, but not yet finished. The hours after sunset stretch long and slow. Even though you've seen hundreds of evenings pass through this house, each one seems to unfold just slightly differently, the way no 2 fires burn the same, even when fed the same coal. The walls hum with quiet energy. Every creak, every whisper of fabric brushing past the door, every kettle click, all of it settles into a familiar pattern. You know the rhythm by heart. The parlor is dim now. Gaslight flickers against fading wallpaper, the pattern indistinct in the glow. You sit on the edge of the settee, your hands folded neatly in your lap. One of the girls, Margaret, the one with the pale ribbon in her hair, hums softly while she mends a torn hem. You don't recognize the melody. It loops like a lullaby. You allow yourself to close your eyes for a moment, just to rest them. You don't sleep here, not downstairs. That would be unsafe. But a minute or 2 with your eyes closed is something, a fragment of peace. Then, a knock, not urgent, not apologetic, just soft, measured taps on the door. Miss Lydia rises immediately. No pause. She knows the difference between a knock that announces a regular and one that brings someone new. She answers in her usual way, calm, composed, a woman who understands the transaction before it's been spoken aloud. This time, she looks to you. A brief glance, nothing more. But it's enough. You stand, smooth your skirt, walk to the stairs. You've learned that hesitation makes people nervous. And nerves, when paired with money, often turn sour. So you move with confidence, slow but sure. You walk up the stairs with the same quiet poise that you've cultivated over time, your hand trailing lightly on the rail, not for support, but as a gesture of calm. In the room, a man stands near the window, his hat in his hands. He's middle-aged, with a stiff collar and well-brushed coat. The light from the candle touches the side of his face, softening the worry lines that are carved across his brow. He speaks first, but only briefly. A greeting, a name that probably isn't his. You nod in reply, stepping inside and closing the door behind you. The room is warm, the fire in the small grate having caught just enough to fill the corners with heat. It crackles quietly as you move to light the second candle. What follows is quiet. He does not linger. He does not demand. He leaves the coins on the chair by the wall, collects his hat, and exits with a gentle nod. No more words. You exhale once he's gone, slowly, silently. You gather the coins, 3 silver, 1 copper. Enough for your share, and a little more. You carry them in your palm like raindrops. Downstairs, Miss Lydia is seated at her desk once again, the ledger open before her. She doesn't look up as you approach. You place the coins in the dish. She tallies them with a practiced hand. The ritual is efficient. The silence between you both is not unfriendly. It is functional. Later, in the kitchen, the girls gather again. The pot on the hob bubbles softly, the stew inside thin but fragrant. Carrots and potatoes float in the broth, the scent of rosemary surprising you. Someone must have had a bit of extra coin today. Or someone remembered a market stall selling herbs in the last light of the afternoon. You eat slowly. You always do. Not because there is so little, but because the act itself is grounding. The warmth of the spoon in your hand, the steam curling upward into your face, the way the bread softens slightly when dipped. It is all part of a rhythm that asks nothing more of you than to sit and eat and be still. The conversation tonight is light. One girl speaks of a man who brought her a pair of gloves, too small, but lovely. Another talks about the new inspector posted nearby, and the way he stared at the doorway without knocking. No one jokes loudly. Laughter, when it comes, is breathy and short, the kind of laughter meant to slip under notice. You return to your room as the hour turns. The candle stub from earlier has burned halfway down. You trim the wick, light it again, and set it beside the basin. You wash your face slowly, cupping water in your palms and pressing it gently to your cheeks. The cloth you use to dry off is coarse, but clean. You fold it afterward and place it back on the shelf. You brush your hair. Long strokes from crown to end. Each pass of the brush slow and deliberate. You don't rush through it. This is your time. This is your space. You've earned nothing here, perhaps, not by the measure of polite society, but what you've carved out for yourself in this small room is real. It is yours. The floorboards creak as someone passes your door. A girl murmurs something to another down the hall. Their voices are low, tired. Yours would be too, if you are speaking. You slip into your nightdress. It's thin, worn soft by washing. You pull the blanket over your knees, then draw it to your shoulders. The candle glows beside you on the stand. The flame wavers slightly in a draught, but holds. You sit quietly, thinking of little. Your eyes move across the room. The tin where you keep your comb and spare buttons, the basin half full, the edge of your dress hanging from the back of the chair. Every item familiar, every shadow known. You breathe in slowly, Hold it. Let it go. Outside, the street is hushed. The gaslight flickers against the low fog that clings to the ground like breath turned solid. Somewhere, a cat yowls. A door closes. A horse snorts and moves on. Inside, everything stills. You lie back, head sinking into the pillow that smells of starch and soap. The candle flickers once more. You watch it without really seeing. Sleep hovers nearby. You feel it in your limbs, in the warmth behind your eyes. You do not resist, and the rhythm continues. You wake once more in darkness, not to noise, not to light, but to the weight of your own body, gently nudging you back toward awareness. Your breath is steady. Your limbs are warm beneath the thin blanket. A familiar scent of wax and wool clings to the air. You lie still for a long moment, letting the day come to you in pieces. There is no rush. This part of the night belongs only to you. That the hour is uncertain, not quite morning, no longer evening. A liminal space. Outside the window, the street sleeps. Inside, the house is silent. Not even footsteps above. No coughing. No turning of handles. Just silence, deep and soft. You sit up slowly, the mattress rustling beneath you. You do not light the candle. You know this room by feel now. You reach for your shawl and drape it around your shoulders. The wool is worn, the edge frayed, but it holds warmth. It holds memory. You stand, cross the floor, and lift the edge of the curtain just enough to peek outside. The glass is cold against your fingertips. The world beyond is still. Mist clings to the rooftops. A lantern on the far corner gutter still burns, casting pale orange light across the stones. No one walks. No horses clatter. Just stillness. You return to your bed, curling your legs beneath you, resting your head against the wall. The quiet hum of the house soothes you. A pipe creaks faintly in the wall, cooling from use. Somewhere, far away, a bell tolls a slow, uncertain hour. Perhaps 2, perhaps 3. It doesn't matter. You breathe. You think about nothing, or almost nothing. Not the clients, not the coins, not the hours past, or the ones yet to come. Just the candle stub on the sill, the soft bend of the pillow beneath your neck, the thread in the hem of your sleeve that has started to unravel. This is not a moment of sadness, or joy, or even longing. It simply is a pause, a breath in the middle of a life made from repetition and resilience. Eventually, the candle wax cools entirely. You hear it, a soft tick as it settles. The scent of soot fades into the background. You turn onto your side, press your knees together, and close your eyes again. There will be more hours like this, more pauses, more quiet. You sleep once more, and when you wake, it is with the first faint stirrings of the house, Miss Lydia's footsteps above, the kettle beginning to boil, a door creaking open down the hallway, the fabric of the day being stitched slowly back together. You rise, stretch your arms, twist your back until it gives a quiet click. You walk to the basin, splash your face, dry it with a cloth folded neatly on the chair. You dress again, the same dress for now. You pin your hair, piece by piece, using your fingers as your only guide. Downstairs, the light is soft. Lamps are lit low. The air is cooler today. A draft slides under the door. You step into the kitchen, nod to the others, and sit at the table. Someone pours tea. Someone breaks a loaf of bread. You chew slowly, savoring the softness in the center, the crispness at the crust. Another girl shares news from a neighbor, someone who saw the inspector again. You listen. You nod. You do not react. Rumors pass through this house like smoke. You let them rise and vanish. Later, you sweep the floor. The broom's bristles catch on a nail near the stair. You adjust, shift your stance, and continue. The floorboards beneath your feet are familiar now. Each creak, each slant. You could walk them blindfolded. The client today is a regular. He brings chocolates wrapped in red foil. He does not expect thanks. He leaves them on the table without a word. You place them in the drawer for later. The visit passes like the others. Quiet, measured, predictable. When it ends, you count the coins, tuck them into your apron, straighten the bedding, and breathe. The rhythm remains. It carries you. In the late afternoon, a new girl arrives. Barely more than 15. She holds her shawl too tightly. Her boots are muddy. Her eyes wide, blinking too often. Miss Lydia greets her softly, places a hand on her arm, leads her to a room upstairs. The house makes space. You and the others do not crowd her. You offer glances, small smiles. Later, someone will give her tea. Someone else will show her where the soap is kept. The rest will come in time. The rhythm teaches. As night returns, you find yourself beside the window again, watching the light fade. The clouds hang low, brushed with violet. A lamplighter passes, pausing at each post, lifting his pole to the mouth of the gas pipe, striking flame. The city glows back to life one square at a time. You press your forehead gently to the glass. The coolness grounds you. Back inside, the candle burns anew. The basin has been emptied. Your bed awaits. You do not feel joy, but you feel rest, the kind of rest that lives in stillness. In quiet, in knowing, you climb into bed. The blanket is light but familiar. You turn onto your side. Outside, London breathes. The house breathes with it. You close your eyes. Sleep returns. Imagine yourself in 1885 London. The fog drapes the cobbled streets like a second skin. The scent of coal smoke hangs low in the air, mixing with the tongue of horse dung and the faint sweetness of overripe fruit from the market stalls. There, tucked behind a row of soot-stained buildings in the working-class district of Marylebone, lives a young girl named Eliza Armstrong. Eliza is 13 years old. Her shoes are scuffed at the toes. Her hands are calloused from helping her mother scrub laundry in cold water until their knuckles turned red. She speaks little not because she is shy, but because words cost energy, and energy is reserved for more pressing needs. Like walking to the pump to fetch water or carrying her baby brother on her hip while her mother stirs a pot of oats. The Armstrongs live in a narrow tenement house. The ceiling leaks in spring, the windows rattle in winter, and privacy is a luxury they cannot afford. Eliza shares a bed with two siblings. Her father, Charles, works as a chimney sweep and porter, taking jobs wherever he can. He often returns home with hands blackened and back bent. Her mother, Elizabeth, manages the home, if managing means stretching a penny until it snaps. The rhythm of their life is ordinary, grimy, gray, and honest. Eliza wakes each morning with the chill of damp linen clinging to her skin. She pulls her shawl tight, washes her face with water that stings from the cold, and begins her day. Sometimes she earns a few coins running errands or fetching bread. Other times she stays in, mending clothes by candlelight. She is not educated beyond a few simple hymns memorized at church and her mother's scoldings about street manners. But Eliza listens, watches, learns. She knows which shops give away the heels of loaves at the end of the day. She knows which neighbors are kind and which to avoid. And she knows that grown-up problems are not for children's ears, even if they echo through thin walls. In the background of this world, there is noise. London is teeming. Horses clatter down High Street. Newspaper boys shout headlines in the morning. Politicians argue in Parliament about the morality of the poor, while those very poor scrape the frost from their windows to see another morning. Her surroundings teach her the rhythm of survival. There is a melody to hardship in this neighborhood, the soft rumble of neighbors sharing gossip on the stoop, the distant clang of a factory bell, the lulling squeak of a cart's wheel. Each day folds into the next with the slow certainty of dawn chasing dusk. At this time, a debate stirs about vice, about brothels, and most of all, about girls like Eliza. Girls who are not seen, not counted, but who exist in vast numbers, walking the same streets, ducking the same carts, and living in the shadows of empire. Among those concerned is a man named William Thomas Stead, editor of the Pall Mall Gazette. A fiery reformer with a flair for the theatrical Stead believes that Britain's laws are failing its children, that young girls are being bought, sold, and discarded in the dark corners of the city while the public looks away. He wants to make the invisible visible, to startle the complacent, to shake society awake. And to do that, he needs a name. Eliza's. What happened next would ripple across the nation. Stead, with the help of reformers and intermediaries, orchestrated what he called a purchase of Eliza from her parents. A staged, symbolic act to prove that the trafficking of minors could happen openly, legally, under the very noses of the law. Money changed hands. Words were exchanged. And Eliza, confused and compliant, was taken to a lodging house. It was a setup, a trap for public opinion. No harm came to her, physically, but she was frightened, removed from her home, placed in unfamiliar rooms. She was told she was being sent to learn housework, that it was an opportunity. Her name would soon be printed across every newspaper in the country, and the age of consent in Britain would rise from 13 to 16. But that was still to come. For now, in these early days, Eliza's life was a quiet rhythm of struggle, of soot and steam and silence. Her story, before it became a headline, was shared by thousands of others. Girls who grew up fast, worked hard, and were noticed only when they vanished. We linger here just a little longer, in the humdrum world of gray skies and cracked pavement. Eliza's fingers are chapped, her knees are bruised, and her hair smells faintly of coal dust. She smiles rarely, but fully, mostly when her baby brother burbles or when the cat curls at her feet. This is where we begin, not with scandal, but with stillness, with the soft clatter of dishes being washed by candlelight, with the sound of bare feet on wooden stairs, with the hush of a city that had not yet learned her name. This is the life of Eliza Armstrong before the world took notice. Imagine now the days after the story broke. The air in London was filled with tension, not the loud, angry kind, but a restless hum. Tea-shop owners whispered about it behind counters. Vicars revised their sermons. Parents looked at their daughters differently. Eliza Armstrong's name was no longer just a name. It had become a symbol shorthand for everything wrong and hidden in the crevices of the empire's proudest city. But symbols are heavy things to carry, especially for a child. In the aftermath of the newspaper's publication, Eliza was quietly taken to a home run by the Salvation Army, a place for fallen girls. She hadn't fallen, not really. She'd been lifted into the air by the hands of activists and politicians, then left suspended without footing. But institutions like categories. She was placed among those who needed saving. You might picture the institution now. Brick walls rising up against the sky, the windows barred not in anger, but in order. The rooms are plain. Gray woolen blankets, small wooden trunks at the foot of each bed, and the sound of quiet prayer each morning. Girls whisper to one another behind cupped hands, sharing tales of their pasts in fragments, like pieces of broken teacups smoothed by time. Eliza listens more than she speaks. She is unsure how to speak about what happened. The world outside has already told her story, told it loudly, in print and in Parliament. She is tired. Her shoes do not fit properly. Her letters to her mother are censored for tone. At the same time, William Stead, the editor who orchestrated the events, is sitting in a prison cell. His sentence is not long. 3 months. He writes letters during his confinement, filled with righteousness and vindication. He believes he has done good, that Eliza will understand someday. He is not wrong about the impact, because while Eliza finds herself removed from her home, her parents, and her routine, the country itself is shifting. The Criminal Law Amendment Act, which had stalled in Parliament for years, suddenly moves forward, debated with urgency, passed with public support. The age of consent is raised. Brothels that employed minors become criminal enterprises. The law changes, and that change bears her name. Yet in the small, quiet rooms of the Salvation Army refuge, Eliza does not celebrate. She does not feel victorious. She scrubs floors. She prays at night. She wonders when she will see her family again. You might imagine her at a small writing desk, penning a letter to her mother. The candle flickers, casting her shadow long across the wall. She hesitates over every word, unsure which ones will be read and which ones will be struck out by the matron. She writes that she is well, that the food is good, that she misses home. She does not write about how cold the stone floor feels in the morning, or how quiet it is during the long hours between chores. She does not write about how the other girls look at her, some with curiosity, others with quiet distance. Her name is known, even here. Outside those walls, the world debates her. Pamphlets are printed. Debates rage in newspapers. Some call her a victim. Others accuse her father of selling her. Still others say she was saved, that she was lucky, that she should be grateful. But the truth is harder to pin down. Charles Armstrong, her father, files a complaint. He demands an inquiry. He says he was deceived, that he never sold his daughter, that he did not understand what was being arranged. His voice, too, is buried beneath headlines and accusations. He does not see himself as a villain. He is a man of limited means, living in a society that sees poverty as moral failure. He wanted better for his children. He did not want this. Eliza's mother, Elizabeth, remains mostly silent. You can imagine her now, stirring a pot on the stove, wiping flour from her apron, answering the knock of a neighbor who wants to know what is true and what is NT. She says little. She keeps her head down. There are no good answers. And what of Rebecca Jarrett? She, too, faces consequences. Though her role was meant to be part of a sting operation, her own complicated past becomes a matter of public interest. She is sentenced, like Stead, but not granted the same sympathetic treatment. She fades from the public eye soon after, all while Eliza grows older. The days in the home become months. She is taught needlework, reading, basic arithmetic. She is praised for obedience, corrected for silence. The routine becomes normal, then numb. Eventually, she is allowed to leave. Her return home is quiet. There are no more headlines, no reporters on the steps. Just the sound of a latch clicking open, the smell of coal in the hearth, a sister who is older now, a father whose beard has gone more gray, a mother whose hands tremble when she pours tea. They do not speak of the newspapers. Years pass. Eliza marries. Her husband is a man of simple means. She works as a cleaner. She has children of her own. She avoids attention. She keeps her head down. But the name never quite leaves her. You might imagine her years later, walking down a market lane, her basket heavy with turnips and flour. A man at the stall squints and mutters. Someone else glances her way, wondering if that's the girl. The one from the papers. She keeps walking. She does not look up. What became of her in her own mind, we may never know. She did not write memoirs, did not attend protests, did not leave behind a diary full of reflections. She lived. That was her act of endurance. And for the rest of Britain, her name became something else entirely. As the clock ticked steadily forward in the heart of London, Eliza Armstrong's name, so simple, so common, and yet now so heavily weighted, began to ripple far beyond the narrow lanes of Marylebone. The shift was not sudden, nor explosive in sound, but rather deliberate and relentless, like the steady chime of a clock tower heard through fog. Eliza, though quiet and small, was about to become the reluctant centerpiece of one of the most controversial public debates of the Victorian age. William Thomas Stead, editor of the Pall Mall Gazette, was no ordinary journalist. He carried the bearing of a crusader, cloaked not in armor, but in editorials. He had a vision of moral reform and a firm belief that the written word could rattle the foundations of Parliament itself. His campaign, titled "A Maiden Tribute of Modern Babylon," was crafted with precision and purpose. In it, he sought to expose what he believed was a vast underworld of exploitation and vice, one that flourished in the shadows of polite society. To make the nation see what he saw, Stead needed not statistics, but a story, and so he staged one. He arranged for the so-called purchase of Eliza Armstrong to demonstrate how easily a young girl, barely in her teens, could be taken from her home and delivered into a world that claimed innocence, yet enabled abuse. The entire event was intended as a kind of performance and exposed through action. But to Eliza and her family, it was real, terrifyingly real. After being taken from her home, Eliza was placed in a lodging house under the supervision of a woman involved in the sting. Though she was not harmed, she was deeply unsettled. The surroundings were unfamiliar. The voices around her, some kind, some cold, belonged to strangers. Her small belongings, hastily packed, offered little comfort. And though the room was warm, Eliza shivered under the weight of uncertainty. She was told she would be learning housework, that she was lucky, that this was an opportunity. But no one asked her what she wanted. No one explained why her mother had agreed to let her go, or why money had passed from one hand to another. The adults spoke of justice and morality, but Eliza heard only doors closing and footsteps retreating. Back in the newsroom, Stead put pen to paper. His prose was vivid, emotional, and strategically provocative. He spared few details. He described dimly lit bedrooms and heavy curtains, cold transactions and grim silences. His articles struck a nerve, no, a chord in the British public. For the first time, readers who had dismissed the plight of the poor as a distant concern found themselves picturing their own daughters in Eliza's place. The backlash was swift and varied. Some hailed Stead as a visionary, a defender of innocence. Others called him a criminal, a sensationalist who had risked a child's well-being for the sake of publicity. Among them were members of Parliament, clergy, and high society figures. The debate raged not only in the press, but in drawing rooms and parishes across England. Legal authorities took notice. The question was no longer just about vice, but about legality. Had Stead committed abduction? Could he claim moral purpose as a defense? The courts would decide. Eliza, meanwhile, was returned to her family, but home no longer felt quite the same. Neighbors whispered. Reporters lingered. Her father, Charles, gave conflicting accounts. Her mother, Elizabeth, kept to herself. Eliza said little. She resumed her old routines, fetching water, watching over her brother, folding laundry, but her expression was more guarded, her footsteps more careful. She had become, without intention or consent, a symbol. The courtroom proceedings were long, heavily attended, and frequently sensationalized in the papers. Stead defended his actions with passion, claiming he had only wanted to bring truth into the light. He admitted to the ruse, but insisted it was necessary. The prosecution, however, argued that intent did not excuse the act. A child had been taken. Consent had been dubious. The law had been broken. In the end, Stead was found guilty and sentenced to 3 months in prison. He served his time at Coldbath Fields, a notoriously austere institution. While there, he wrote letters and reflected on the cost of his convictions. He did not recant. To the very end, he believed his actions had awakened a sleeping nation. And perhaps they had, for shortly after the trial, Parliament passed the Criminal Law Amendment Act. The age of consent was raised from 13 to 16. Brothels faced increased scrutiny. The public began to talk, in earnest, about protecting the vulnerable. Eliza, though, was never consulted in these discussions. She was not invited to speak, nor asked to testify. Her name remained in the headlines, but her voice was absent. She returned to anonymity in time as new scandals emerged and a news cycle moved on. Still, the reverberations of her story lingered. Social reformers cited her case for decades. The debate over Stead's tactics became a touchstone in journalism ethics, and Eliza herself became an enduring, if silent, symbol of a society in transition. A young girl briefly illuminated in the harsh light of public scrutiny before the shadows returned. We imagine her now, years later, perhaps walking through the same soot-covered streets with slower steps and a quieter gaze. Life resumed its old rhythms, but the silence she carried was heavier than before. Her childhood, once marked by routine hardship, had been transformed by something far more complex: notoriety. In history books, she is often reduced to a footnote. But here, we linger. In the long silence after the trial, in the echo of courtroom doors, in the quiet rustle of newspapers being folded and discarded, we remember her not as a cause nor a headline, but as a person, Eliza Armstrong, a name that passed through countless mouths, but was spoken by none with her own voice. And that, perhaps, is what history most often forgets. Not the noise, but the quiet that follows it. When Eliza returned to her neighborhood after the storm of the headlines, it was not the same Marylebone she had known. The cobblestones still glistened under the rain, and the laundry still flapped from the upper windows. But there was a different quality to the silence in the alleyways, a sharpness to the glances from neighbors, a hesitation in the greetings of shopkeepers. To many, Eliza had become a curiosity, a tale whispered behind hands in the marketplace. There she goes, they might say, the girl from the papers. Not with cruelty, necessarily, but with a mix of wonder and discomfort, as though she were both victim and spectacle. At home, too, things were different. Her father seemed more withdrawn. Sometimes he left early and came back late, silent and tired. Her mother, Elizabeth, hovered more often, her hands constantly occupied, but her eyes always on Eliza, as if trying to read a story that had changed its ending. Eliza herself had no language for what had happened. She had not been educated in politics, nor trained to understand reform. What she knew was this: she had been taken, confused, made part of something larger than her world, and then returned with that world altered beyond recognition. The sensation was something like being wrapped in fog, not the comforting kind that clings to your shoulders, but the kind that blinds, that steals the corners of the familiar. She walked through her old routines as though they were echoes of someone else's life. Boiling water, folding linen, rubbing at a stubborn stain until her fingers ached. But there were moments of clarity sharp, thin slivers of understanding that pricked her thoughts. Like when she heard her name spoken by strangers on the street, or when she found a scrap of newspaper near the pump, folded and soggy, but legible enough to make out a headline with the words "child victim" and "scandal." She would trace the letters with a finger, slow and deliberate, as though touching the words would somehow give her control over them. Meanwhile, outside her narrow world, discussions raged on. Pulpits thundered with sermons on virtue and sin. Editorials piled upon one another, drawing lines between heroism and exploitation. Some saw Stead as a savior, others as a showman too willing to gamble with a child's fate. And in Parliament, debates grew fierce over the Criminal Law Amendment Act. Eliza became emblematic of a cause, but not of her own choosing. Her name was summoned in speeches, scribbled in pamphlets, and cited by reformers, and yet her voice remained silent. It is likely she never read the full texts of those articles. She may not have known what words were used to describe her, what phrases cloaked her life in the grand language of justice. The gap between the public Eliza and the private one was vast. The public Eliza was a symbol young, endangered, a rallying point. The private Eliza was a girl with a sore foot from walking too long in worn shoes, who still smiled when the neighborhood dog trotted by, and who, some nights, lay awake, wondering if her life would ever again feel like her own. The house she lived in remained cramped. The wallpaper curled at the corners. The floorboards creaked the same way they always had. But her world had changed. She moved with caution now, as if afraid of stepping into another story that was not hers to tell. At church, the sermons often felt pointed, even if they were not. "We must protect the innocence of our daughters," the minister would say, his voice heavy with implication. Heads would nod. Eyes would flicker toward Eliza's pew. She sat with hands folded, expression unreadable. Sometimes her younger siblings asked questions she couldn't answer. "Where did you go?" her brother once whispered. She had no answer that would make sense to him. So she simply said, "I was away, but I came back." And what else could she say? Outside of Marylebone, her story continued to echo. Reformers gained momentum. Newspapers continued to sell. The law had changed. Yes, but so had something deeper. The way people viewed the unseen. Poor girls like Eliza, who had once blended into the background of the city's grand portrait, were now brought forward, examined, pitied, debated. But it is one thing to be seen and another to be understood. Eliza's experiences could not be captured in ink or law alone. They lived in the quiet between headlines, in the space between morning chores and restless dreams, in the invisible weight of being known too widely and too little at once. There was no dramatic conclusion for her. No sweeping closure. Life went on, slow and stubborn. London did not stop turning. And Eliza, in her resilience, adapted. She began walking to a nearby charity school twice a week. She learned to write her name with more certainty. She practiced her letters on scraps of paper, using a stub of pencil so short she had to pinch it tightly. One day she wrote a sentence. "I am Eliza." It was not for anyone else, just for her. She never became a public speaker, nor a figure in further campaigns. History did not follow her beyond those months of fire and spotlight. But she lived, quietly, honestly, through the aftermath. And in that, there is something profoundly human. A reminder that history is not only written by those who shout the loudest, but also by those who continue gently and persistently through the quiet. This is the story of a girl returned, of normalcy regained, though never quite the same, of a life that, for a moment, intersected with the grand currents of history, and then receded, leaving only ripples. We stay here a little longer, in the hush that followed the headlines, in the soft brush of coal dust from her skirt, in the light of an oil lamp that flickers over a folded letter never sent. Eliza Armstrong, a name still spoken, even in sleep. In the years following the trial, Eliza's presence in the public imagination began to wane. Yet the imprint left by her story did not fade so quickly. It remained etched into the conscience of a society struggling to reckon with the realities it had long ignored. And though Eliza retreated into a quieter existence, the ripples of her experience continued to move outward, nudging forward reform, reflection, and the slow, arduous shift of societal awareness. There were moments when journalists, looking back on the scandal that had once captured a nation, would reach for her name again. Retrospectives were penned, anniversary articles published. Some speculated about what had become of her, where she lived, what sort of woman she had grown into. These inquiries were often less about Eliza herself and more about what she represented, a case study, a precedent, a moral fable. But Eliza, it seemed, did not answer those questions. If she spoke, her words were not recorded. If she objected, history did not take note. In the silence, a myth began to build around her, one shaped more by the needs of the time than by the contours of her real life. In the rare mentions that surfaced, there was an effort to portray her as having turned out well, as if the outcome of her life were a metric for the righteousness of Stead's cause. She had married, some said, and had children. Others insisted she had moved away, perhaps to the countryside, perhaps to anonymity. But details were few, and facts fewer still. Meanwhile, the streets of London shifted with the pulse of change. Gas lamps gave way to electric ones. Horse-drawn carts began to share the road with early motor cars. The skyline changed, subtly but steadily. And beneath these transformations, a deeper change was occurring, the slow redefinition of childhood, of protection, of societal obligation. The case of Eliza Armstrong had planted a seed. It grew not quickly, nor without resistance, but persistently. Philanthropic organizations expanded their reach. Debates on child welfare, found new momentum. Legal standards, though still imperfect, crept toward greater consideration of consent, agency, and care. Eliza's story became a touchstone in academic circles, where students of journalism ethics discussed the morality of Stead's actions. Was it ever justifiable to manipulate real lives for the sake of greater truth? What lines, if any, should journalists never cross? Professors would present the Armstrong affair as a classic dilemma, means versus ends. And yet, in all these debates, Eliza remained a name without a voice, a character rather than a person, the one who had been acted upon. It is not difficult to imagine her years later, perhaps sitting by a window as the late sun slanted in through the glass. The world outside would have continued its rotation, indifferent and vibrant. Children might laugh in the distance. Vendors might call out their wares. And Eliza, in that moment, might quietly sip her tea, her thoughts untethered from the noise of her past. Or perhaps not. Perhaps she never escaped the shadow fully. Perhaps the memory of being taken, of being used for a purpose she neither understood nor consented to remain, like a knot in the fabric of her story, one that could not be smoothed out entirely. What we do know is that she survived, and for many, that survival was framed as proof of resilience, of divine justice, of the essential goodness of the human spirit. But survival is not always a neat victory. It does not always arrive with banners or applause. Sometimes it looks like a woman folding sheets in the quiet morning light, or a mother buttoning her child's coat before school. In the final analysis, Eliza Armstrong's life offers no grand moral, no definitive judgment. It offers, instead, a landscape of questions. Questions about power, about protection, about the lines between advocacy and exploitation. It asks us to consider the cost of progress, especially when that cost is borne by those who never had a choice. It is fitting, perhaps, that her story continues in this gentle telling, not shouted from pulpits, nor emblazoned in headlines, but spoken softly into the dark as the world outside quiets. Here, in this space, her memory is allowed to settle, not as a symbol, but as a presence. A girl who was there, a life that mattered. And in honoring that presence, we also honor the many who shared her fate but never reached the newspapers. The countless others who walked the same narrow alleys, who lived in the same small rooms, who bore the weight of poverty and obscurity without ever being pulled into the limelight. History often forgets them. But tonight, in the hush of reflection, we remember. We remember Eliza not as a case, not as a cause, but as a person. Still, always. Beneath the surface of Victorian London, where soot-blackened bricks and gaslight flickered against fog-stained alleys, the dead rested uneasily. Not all of them in grand cemeteries with angels carved in weathered marble, and not all of them remembered. In the shadows of churches, under the floors of infirmaries, behind workhouses, and sometimes under seemingly ordinary yards and gardens, the earth concealed grim secrets, a silent archive of lives lost, discarded, and long forgotten. London in the 19th century was a city of relentless motion, Carriages clattered on uneven stones. Vendors cried their wares through the streets, and chimneys exhaled coal smoke into a perpetually gray sky. But beneath this noisy rhythm, a quieter story was unfolding, written not in ink or gaslight, but in bones. There was one such place, Camberwell. Today, it is a familiar part of Greater London, but in the mid-1800s, it was on the edge of the known city, a transitional space between the urban and the pastoral. And it was here, quite by accident, that laborers unearthed something curious while digging foundations for a new warehouse extension in the 1860s. Not one skeleton, but dozens, then hundreds. The bodies were small, disturbingly small. Many of the skulls belonged to infants tiny, delicate, and sometimes still swaddled in the remains of burial cloths. Some lay in clusters, others alone. No markers, no names, no records in the parish books. The discovery was not publicized widely. In fact, it was quietly covered, with only a few passing mentions in obscure medical journals and private correspondences. The men digging the trench were told to keep going. A few bodies were removed for study. The rest were reburied. A brick wall was raised over the site, and London moved on, as it so often did. Yet among a small circle of scholars and urban archaeologists, the Camberwell infant remains, though never officially labeled as such, became a subject of hushed fascination. Where had these babies come from? Why were so many buried together, unmarked and unclaimed? As the 20th century began to unravel the city's past, these questions resurfaced with urgency. In 1922, during renovations in the same area, another set of remains was uncovered again, small bones. Again, no markers. This time, a curious physician named Dr. Edwin Merriweather documented the findings more thoroughly. In his notes, he remarked on the arrangement of the burials, not random, layered, each layer marked by lime, intentional. It led to a disturbing but increasingly probable theory. In Victorian London, institutions proliferated to manage the city's swelling underclasses. Workhouses, foundling hospitals, Magdalen homes, and brothels. Brothels of every tier, from the discreetly appointed houses in Soho to the bleak and dirty rooms off Fleet Street. Infant mortality was already high in the era, but for women working in sex trade, it was higher still. Children born to such mothers were often unregistered, unnamed, unwanted by the law, and invisible to the state. The Camberwell remains, many now believe, may have come from such circumstances. Some suspect they were the children of prostitutes, taken either by disease, neglect, or something darker. Perhaps they had been quietly removed from brothels by midwives paid not to ask questions. Perhaps the homes in the area had once served as informal lying-in wards for women who could not go to hospitals. What makes the theory more compelling is the proximity to a known workhouse complex, a place notorious for its overcrowding, underfunding, and grim mortality statistics. In the mid-1800s, the Camberwell workhouse saw dozens of infant deaths annually, often attributed to wasting diseases or congenital frailty. Yet the numbers in the burial site suggest something more systematic, more hidden. Other theories emerged. Some suggested that the area had housed a forgotten lying-in home, perhaps a charitable one that, overwhelmed by cases, buried stillborn or sickly infants on site. Others whispered darker possibilities. That infanticide, though illegal, may have gone underreported in the poorest quarters of London, with midwives or caretakers disposing of infants discreetly to spare mothers shame or reprisal. There are records, fragmentary and incomplete, of babies being born and dying in such institutions, with barely a line to mark their passing. Infant male, 3 days. Deceased, no baptism. That was all. No parents listed. No burial site noted. This mystery took on more weight when in 1978, amateur historians, using old maps and ledgers, traced the likely location of the graveyard back to a disused part of the old parish grounds. It was never officially declared a cemetery, but beneath that soil, hundreds of small lives had ended and been laid to rest without ceremony. No official investigation was ever launched. The area had already been developed by then. Warehouses stood over the ground. Trucks rumbled through the streets, oblivious to the bones beneath. And London, again, had moved forward. But the questions remain. Who were they? Why were they hidden? And how many more such places lie underfoot, their stories buried in silence and clay? As we sit with this mystery tonight, we invite the weight of quiet curiosity, not horror, not drama, but a slow unfolding of forgotten truths. Let us pause here, at the edge of the unmarked graves, and listen to the silence, to the stones, to what remains. The graveyard mystery in Camberwell was not an isolated case. Victorian London, with its million beating hearts and countless untold sorrows, was littered with pockets of unofficial memory. These were places where the undocumented dead were quietly placed in earth that did not remember their names, beneath hospitals, behind churches, beneath tenement yards. They were poor, often children, often women, and they existed beyond the scope of the day's bureaucracy. In the late 19th century, the city's population exploded. Between 1800 and 1900, London swelled from just under 1 million to over 6.5 million people. Infrastructure buckled beneath the pressure, and so did record-keeping. Workhouses, almshouses, and urban hospitals became overwhelmed not only by the living, but also by the dead. Graveyards filled faster than new land could be consecrated. Paupers' funerals became common mass burials, performed quickly, quietly, cheaply. Infant mortality rates hovered tragically high, especially among the poor. In some parishes, up to a third of children did not live past their first year. Disease, malnutrition, unhygienic birth environments, and overworked midwives created a perfect storm for loss. Yet not every death was registered. Paperwork was often viewed as a burden or a luxury. And in the chaos of urban poverty, the dead could become invisible almost as easily as the living. Returning to Camberwell, we consider again the layering of the remains. Dr. Merriweather's 1922 notes suggested that the bones were separated by thin lines of quicklime and alkaline substance used to hasten decomposition. Quicklime was not typically used in respectful burial practices. It was utilitarian, clinical, often employed in plague pits and emergency wartime trenches. Its presence here hinted at a desire not only to bury, but to erase, to conceal. The records of the local parish at the time make no mention of a child cemetery, nor do the workhouse logs list a mass death event. The absence of documentation is itself suspicious. As Victorian institutions were obsessed with order tallies, lists, ledgers, reports, the lack of entries suggests intentional omission, or perhaps systemic neglect. Among the few who investigated the matter further was an archivist named Judith Ramsay, who in 1984 published a private monograph called Lines in the Dust. Ramsay was not a historian by training. She had worked for decades in library administration, but her curiosity about the Camberwell case led her down years of research through death registries, midwifery licenses, and letters penned by local clergy. Ramsay's most unsettling discovery came in the form of an 1848 letter from a Reverend Josiah Lowndes, who mentioned in passing that the burden of caring for the fallen women's progeny has grown heavier. We have spoken with the sisters regarding the handling of the infants who do not survive. The arrangement in the garden must, regrettably, continue for now. The letter was never meant for public eyes. It was a response to another clergyman, and though the language was vague, the implications were clear. The garden may well have been the burial yard later found by construction workers. The sisters may have been a reference to a nearby convent that quietly cared for destitute mothers. Midwifery at the time was in a strange liminal space between folk practice and professional medicine. Many midwives were trained through experience, not schooling, and the regulation of their practices was inconsistent at best. In poorer quarters, women known as handywomen or monthly nurses often performed deliveries and sometimes assisted in the quiet removal of stillborns or worse. One of Ramsay's most cited sources was a surviving 1863 invoice ledger from a midwife named Edith Swale, listing over 100 deliveries in 2 years. At least 20 of the entries were marked with the same small code, PB. Ramsay believed it stood for pauper burial. The babies had died shortly after birth. No surnames were recorded. All of this, Ramsay argued, pointed to a quiet, tolerated pattern: pregnancies among sex workers or destitute women births outside of hospitals. And then, when the children did not survive, or perhaps were not permitted to survive, an unceremonious burial in an informal plot, the women returned to their lives. The city returned to its rhythm. For Victorian society, where propriety was paramount and morality tightly controlled by the upper classes, such occurrences were simultaneously scandalous and invisible. Officially, these children did not exist, but their bones remained, mute and persistent. Archaeological finds, like the one in Camberwell, echoed similar discoveries in other major cities of the time. Dublin, Liverpool, and even Paris reported the occasional surfacing of unmarked infant graves in historically impoverished neighborhoods. In almost every case, the explanation hovered between inadequate record-keeping and systemic concealment. So, what does it tell us to uncover the remains of 100 children beneath the brick and soot of modern London? Not a horror story, not a ghost tale, but a gentle reminder that the city has always carried within it more than what is visible. That below the traffic and the bustle, there lies a deeper truth. One of suffering, yes, but also of persistence. Of stories longing to be heard. For the living, these graves might not have existed, but for the dead, they were the only trace. Let us imagine now the women who bore these children, the long walks to distant tenements, the whispered arrangements with midwives, the birth pains borne in cold rooms with no light. And then the silence that followed, the ache, the return to work, the hope that no one would ask too many questions. In the next part, we'll all consider how the cultural beliefs of the time influenced how death was handled among the poor, and how these beliefs evolved over time. We'll trace the subtle threads between poverty, shame, religion, and the bureaucratic mechanics that shaped who was remembered and who was buried in silence. We continue softly, listening still. The graveyard mystery in Camberwell was not an isolated case. Victorian London, with its million beating hearts and countless untold sorrows, was littered with pockets of unofficial memory. These were places where the undocumented dead were quietly placed in earth that did not remember their names, beneath hospitals, behind churches, beneath tenement yards. They were poor, often children, often women, and they existed beyond the scope of the day's bureaucracy. In the late 19th century, the city's population exploded. Between 1800 and 1900, London swelled from just under 1 million to over 6.5 million people. Infrastructure buckled beneath the pressure, and so did record-keeping. Workhouses, almshouses, and urban hospitals became overwhelmed not only by the living, but also by the dead. Graveyards filled faster than new land could be consecrated. Paupers' funerals became common mass burials, performed quickly, quietly, cheaply. Infant mortality rates hovered tragically high, especially among the poor. In some parishes, up to 1/3 of children did not live past their first year. Disease, malnutrition, unhygienic birth environments, and overworked midwives created a perfect storm for loss. Yet not every death was registered. Paperwork was often viewed as a burden or a luxury. And in the chaos of urban poverty, the dead could become invisible almost as easily as the living. Returning to Camberwell, we consider again the layering of the remains. Dr. Merriweather's 1922 notes suggested that the bones were separated by thin lines of quicklime and alkaline substance used to hasten decomposition. Quicklime was not typically used in respectful burial practices. It was utilitarian, clinical, often employed in plague pits and emergency wartime trenches. Its presence here hinted at a desire not only to bury, but to erase, to conceal. The records of the local parish at the time make no mention of a child cemetery, nor do the workhouse logs list a mass death event. The absence of documentation is itself suspicious. As Victorian institutions were obsessed with order tallies, lists, ledgers, reports, the lack of entries suggests intentional omission. or perhaps systemic neglect. Among the few who investigated the matter further was an archivist named Judith Ramsey, who in 1984 published a private monograph called Lines in the Dust. Ramsey was not a historian by training. She had worked for decades in library administration, but her curiosity about the Camberwell case led her down years of research through death registries, midwifery licenses, and letters penned by local clergy. Ramsey's most unsettling discovery came in the form of an 1848 letter from a Reverend Josiah Lowndes, who mentioned in passing that the burden of caring for the fallen women's progeny has grown heavier. We have spoken with the sisters regarding the handling of the infants who do not survive. The arrangement in the garden must, regrettably, continue for now. The letter was never meant for public eyes. It was a response to another clergyman, and though the language was vague, the implications were clear. The garden may well have been the burial yard later found by construction workers. The sisters may have been a reference to a nearby convent that quietly cared for destitute mothers. Midwifery at the time was in a strange liminal space between folk practice and professional medicine. Many midwives were trained through experience, not schooling, and the regulation of their practices was inconsistent at best. In poorer quarters, women known as handywomen or monthly nurses often performed deliveries and sometimes assisted in the quiet removal of stillborns or worse. One of Ramsey's most cited sources was a surviving 1863 invoice ledger from a midwife named Edith Swale, listing over 100 deliveries in 2 years. At least 20 of the entries were marked with the same small code, PB. Ramsey believed it stood for pauper burial. The babies had died shortly after birth. No surnames were recorded. All of this, Ramsey argued, pointed to a quiet, tolerated pattern. Pregnancies among sex workers or destitute, women births outside of hospitals, and then when the children did not survive, or perhaps were not permitted to survive, an unceremonious burial in an informal plot. The women returned to their lives. The city returned to its rhythm. For Victorian society, where propriety was paramount and morality tightly controlled by the upper classes, such occurrences were simultaneously scandalous and invisible. Officially, these children did not exist, but their bones remained, mute and persistent. Archaeological finds, like the one in Camberwell, echoed similar discoveries in other major cities of the time. Dublin, Liverpool, and even Paris reported the occasional surfacing of unmarked infant graves in historically impoverished neighborhoods. In almost every case, the explanation hovered between inadequate record-keeping and systemic concealment. So, what does it tell us to uncover the remains of 100 children beneath the brick and soot of modern London? Not a horror story, not a ghost tale, but a gentle reminder that the city has always carried within it more than what is visible. That below the traffic and the bustle, there lies a deeper truth, one of suffering, yes, but also of persistence, of stories longing to be heard. For the living, these graves might not have existed, but for the dead, they were the only trace. Let us imagine now the women who bore these children, the long walks to distant tenements, The whispered arrangements with midwives, the birth pains borne in cold rooms with no light, and then the silence that followed, the ache, the return to work, the hope that no one would ask too many questions. We'll trace the subtle threads between poverty, shame, religion, and the bureaucratic mechanics that shaped who was remembered and who was buried in silence. As the day draws to a close, let us leave these quiet shadows behind. May the stories we've uncovered rest gently in your thoughts. And as sleep begins to settle around you, may your dreams be calm, your breath steady, and your night truly peaceful. Good night. My dear viewers, may the sea of dreams carry you to everlasting happiness. Until tomorrow, take care.